earlier, is that it? All right, hey, how's everyone doing? Hi, Mom. In case you've never been here before, I always say hi to Mom. Mom is coming into town next week, so we are super excited. And I heard my house is going to maybe close a little bit earlier than I expected in North Carolina, so I might be officially a Floridian by next time we meet. So I'll only have one house. I won't have that vacation place.
It's hard to believe.
Oh yeah, I want to have that vacation place in North Carolina, you know, in rural North Carolina. Okay, tonight we're going to look at Mark 15, 1 through I can't remember where I am. 1 through 41. Really, the first 41 verses of Mark. Okay, so let's give you a little backstory here. We all know what happens the Thursday before. It's Passover. The disciples celebrate the Passover. They believe the Passover, Jerusalem, old Jerusalem around the wall is probably 1 square mile. We all know Thursday they celebrate the Passover. We know it as the Last Supper. Jesus is again, last week, or 2 weeks ago, we were talking about the Passover. Last week, Jesus goes to the Garden of Gethsemane. His trial's there. He is betrayed here. Now we're into Friday. Friday, he is tried here. Somewhere around here. We will talk about that in detail in just a moment. All right. So during Holy Week, we know this day as Good Friday. Why is it good? Did anything good come out of it? Some people are like, some people are like, I don't know. Yeah. If you think about it, the answer is, yeah, sure. Yeah, something great came out of it. We're talking about the good thing. Good Friday is actually translated, it started in Greek, they call it Holy and Great Friday. In the Roman tradition, they call it Holy Friday. And in English, it derived from a German word, which I am not going to pronounce for any man's money. But basically, it meant God's Friday. It meant God's Friday, and that somehow, of course, over the years, gets translated into another German word, which meant Good Friday. So we celebrate Good Friday, and it's really my translation, kind of a variant from what its original, which meant God's Friday. All right? So it's a Good Friday. We're going to talk about why it's so good in just a moment. Please follow along with me. Chapter 15, 1 through 5. We're going to break this down. Now in the Gospel of Mark, in these first 40 verses of this chapter, in chapter 15, Mark breaks this down into 3-hour intervals, right? There's a 6 to 9 a.m. period, 9 a.m. to noon, if I can spell noon, and then noon to 3 p.m. That's what we're going to look at today. What happens from 6 to 9 p.m.? Trial, okay. 9 to noon, hanging. Noon to 3. Yes, I'm going to put darkness and death. Okay? All right. 15, 1 through 5. Will somebody read that for me, please?
As soon as it was morning, the chief priests held a consultation with the elders and scribes and the whole council. They bound Jesus, led him away, and handed him over to Pilate. Pilate asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" He answered him, "You say so." Then the chief priests accused him of many things. Pilate asked him again, "Have you no answer? See how many charges they bring against you?" But Jesus made no further reply, so that Pilate was amazed.
Okay. In the death of Jesus, in the earthly death of Jesus, who do we blame? Remember how last week, one of the biggest debates, I believe, one of the biggest questions in Christianity that still people debate on is, did Jesus have to go to the cross? Or did Jesus want to go to the cross, is even a better statement. And in this debate, who is to blame for the earthly death of Jesus?
Everyone seems to blame Pilate.
It was predestined.
Predestined.
Everyone seems to blame Pilate on it.
A lot of people blame. Remember when I said Mel Gibson, the Passion? He had that interview, and Gibson is a big believer that Pontius Pilate is the one who
He could have stopped it.
could have stopped it,
But
and
he
he
didn't.
didn't. And he's to blame. He's to blame. Our Apostles' Creed said that he suffered under Pontius Pilate. But suffering under and suffering because of are two different things. That's debatable. Stay with me, okay? It's debatable. Yes?
Isn't the word blame kind of an awkward word there? I mean, to say to blame, but without his death, we wouldn't have salvation, so.
Well, see, the answer is we're to blame. The ultimate answer is we're to blame. It's not Pilate. It's not the Roman government. It's not the Jews. I meant to come over here. It's not the Jews. We all are to blame. It is our sin, our iniquities, that caused him to go to the cross. We'll talk about that, what happens here from noon to 3 p.m. But Pilate, and you have to understand something. This is not a government who really is trying to encroach upon the Jews during this time. And I'll tell you why, or what I believe is the reason. It is because as long as the Jews are paying off the Romans will keep the peace, and everything will be hunky-dory. The Romans will answer to whoever's in charge of the Jews. They will take heed to what they say, and whatever's fine with them, they'll go with. You know. So again, Pilate comes. They said, "Hey, we've tried it." Because remember, last week we talked about basically the Sanhedrin was a grand jury, and the chief priests, and they had the rights of a citizen to arrest someone, even though they had no authority in the government. They had the right to arrest them, and they brought them before the Sanhedrin, and they convicted them here. And now on Friday we shift into this: we're going to try him before the government. And here's Pilate. And so he said, "Okay, well, they say you're guilty. So, are you really the king of the Jews?" Basically they're charging him with heresy. You say you come from the line of David. You say you are the new Messiah. Are you really the king? And Jesus says, "Well, you have said so. Okay, sure." And so Pilate in his mind is going, "Okay, wait a second. They bring this guy up to me for heresy, and all he has to do is wiggle his way out if he really wants to." But he says, no, it's true. I am. So Pilate is faced with this dilemma. He has to keep the Jewish leaders happy. He has to keep the Jewish leaders happy. And so, what does it matter to him to kill someone that they want to be killed? Remember how I said that we know this in the United States, that politicians make strange bedfellows, right? And this is exactly what is going on here. All right. So, of course, Pilate goes along, and so he has him ordered to be crucified. And we're going to talk a lot about this, this walk here in just a moment. So right now we are still around the 6 o'clock area, and now we're moving to 9 o'clock. And someone please read verses 6 through 15.
Now it was a custom at the feast to release a prisoner whom the people requested. A man named Barabbas was in prison with the insurrectionists who had committed murder in the uprising. The crowd came up and asked Pilate to do for them what he usually did. Do you want me to release to you the king of the Jews? Asked Pilate, knowing it was out of envy that the chief priests had handed Jesus over to him. But the chief priests stirred up the crowd to have Pilate release Barabbas instead. What shall I do then with the one you call the king of the Jews? Pilate asked them. Crucify him, they shouted. Why? What crime has he committed? Asked Pilate. Well, they shouted all the louder, crucify him. Wanting to satisfy the crowd, Pilate released Barabbas to them. He had Jesus flogged and handed him over to be crucified.
All right? So, Pilate not only answers to the chief priest, basically, and he does what he wants, what they pretty much want him to do. But during the Passover feast, they actually participate in a Jewish custom of the releasing of a prisoner. The releasing of the prisoner, of course, in Judaism is that it symbolizes your escape from the bondage of Egypt. So every year during the festival, they will release one prisoner. And so this is another chance for people to redeem themselves and for Pilate to be the scapegoat. It doesn't say in Mark, but I can't remember which one it is. I think it's Matthew. But Pilate washes his hands of this. And he says, this is not my work.
I believe when he had him flogged, I believe that he was hoping that would have been enough.
Yeah.
Pilate, I believe at the flogging, that would have been enough to satisfy him.
Yeah, yeah. We'll get into that in just a moment. But he says, I have this one prisoner we can release. And they said, you know, what about this Jesus guy? And so here's the interesting part. You have Pilate nodding to the religious leaders, and these same people, who we believe the same people, who we have no doubt or no belief to doubt any different. We have these same people who admonish Jesus coming into the city. We have to believe that these are some of the same people right now that are saying, crucify him. Because they as well do not want to answer to the chief priest. Oh my gosh, they're crucifying Jesus. What do you think they'll do to me? That's exactly what they were thinking. And so, not only did the government turn their back on Jesus, the same crowd that were saying, Hosanna in the highest, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, they turned their back on Jesus. And they said, no, crucify him. They did not want to be part of what's going on. It's one of the worst feelings, and I'm sure you've dealt with it in your own personal lives, is when someone says, and man, this has happened to me as a minister so many times. Somebody goes, yeah, I got your back, and then you go up to authority, and it's like, man, I don't know what he's talking about. Or they remain silent. And that's exactly what's going on here. Not crucifying him. All right? So let's go.
Same thing, staying silent is the same
Staying
thing.
silent to say, yeah, if you stay silent, you're, like we believe I believe in the sins of omission and commission. Do you know what that means? Someone tell me what does sins of omission and commission mean?
The things you do and the things you think you do.
Right, the acts you commit that are unwilling to God, and the things that you don't do as well. If I drive by and there's someone on the side of the road with no gas in their car, is broken down, and I don't stop, Now, I'm not talking about like, I'm a guy, and I don't mean, this is not a sexist thing, but I feel safe to do it, okay? And if I don't stop, I feel like I've committed a sin by not doing what I'm supposed to do. By not doing what I'm supposed to do and doing the stuff I'm not supposed to do. That's sins of omission and commission. Okay? All right. Someone read. (16 through 20).
The soldiers led Jesus away into the palace, that is, the Praetorium, and called together the whole company of soldiers. They put a purple robe on him, and then they twisted together a crown of thorns and set it on him. And they began to call out to him, "Hail, King of the Jews!" Again and again they struck him on the head with the staff and spit on him. Falling on their knees, they paid homage to him. And when they had mocked him, they took off the purple robe and put on his own clothes again on him. And then they laid him out to crucify him.
All right. There's a couple of things that Mark does not mention. Matthew says that he was lashed 40 times less one for heresy, of course, the crime that they say he committed. Why did they lash him 39 times and not 40?
40 probably would have killed him.
No, close, yeah. I mean, he was there already. We'll get that in a minute. Under Jewish law, you're supposed to lash someone 40 times. Levitical law is 40 times. You cannot beat them more than 40. All right? So what they do is they beat someone or whip someone 39 times. In case you forgot or you counted an extra number, you missed a number, you still got to 40. All right? So that's why they would lash him 39 times, 40 less one for heresy. All right? They did a couple of things here. The soldiers led Jesus away into the palace. I believe he is somewhere around here. He's tried. He's led here into Herod's palace. And then they are making this journey here to the cross. Some believe, and they're still fighting over this, by the way, some believe he is crucified somewhere over here. I believe that's around a third of a mile. 2,000 feet from Herod's place to this cross. It's another third of a mile over here. So let's pretend he has to go all the way over here. It's almost 2/3 of a mile. And all the way he's being lashed. And then not only that, they put a crown of thorns on him. As Sherry said just a little while ago, you know, why do you beat him 39 and not 40? And you say because 40 will probably kill him. Well, he's close. I mean, he's beaten. He's probably at this time bleeding a lot. And when I talk about this death, I'm not trying to do it to be gross. I'm just trying to tell you what he went through. Okay? He's probably bleeding a lot. He's probably getting dehydrated at this point. The soldiers are now laughing at him, basically. They put a crown of thorns around his head, and they dress him in purple. Why do they dress him in purple? Okay, purple, biblically and in the government, represents royalty. There are four big ones. One is royalty. What's another one? No. What does purple represent? What does the color purple represent? There's four. Royalty is one.
Military.
I'm sorry?
Military.
No.
Money.
Wealth.
said costly.
Oh, costly, okay. So we have royalty, wealth, the third is power, and the fourth is status, okay? Wealth, power, status, and royalty. Royalty, wealth, power, status. Couldn't remember that first. Royalty, wealth, power, and status. So they put this robe on him, not to say he has any of that, but they mock him and then they strip him. Now when they strip him of this robe, what are they saying to him? You're nothing. You're a common, poor, give me an antonym for criminal, yes. You're a common, poor criminal.
And defeated.
And defeated, yep. You're 0 for 4, buddy. You're all of that. And not only that, well, we'll get into the cross here in just a second. So, he's making this journey. So, remember, he has a trial. This takes 3 hours now. He has a trial. Pilate then goes and asks, who do you want to release? They release Barabbas instead of Jesus. And now, and during this 3 hours, they're beating him and he's having to carry his cross at least 1/3 of a mile, if not 2/3 of a mile. All right? And usually people help, and we see this, people help carry criminals' crosses. Say that 3 times fast. People help carry criminals' crosses because of just the sheer weight. Okay, someone read. We're going to skip 21 through 24. No, we're not. We're going to read 21 through 24. Someone read that for me, please.
A certain man from Cyrene, Simon, the father of Alexander and Rufus, was passing by on his way in from the country, and they forced him to carry the cross. They brought Jesus to the place called Golgotha, which means the place of the skull. Then they offered him wine mixed with myrrh, but he did not take it. And they crucified him. Dividing up his clothes, they cast lots to see what each would get.
All right? Now, in case you ever got confused like I did when I was growing up, well, is it Golgotha or is it Calvary? Well, it's synonymous, in case you ever wanted to know. Calvary is the Latin derivative from the word Golgotha. It's where we get the word Calvary. It means skull, or this Golgotha's place in the skull. Calvary actually means skull. So they're synonymous in case you never put 2 and 2 together. So now I want you to remember something. Simon of Cyrene is forced to carry his cross. Some believe that is because Jesus is so weak at this point that he cannot actually do it himself. We'll talk about crosses in just a moment. But he is so bad off, someone else has to carry it for him. Well, actually, the soldiers make this guy carry it for him. They offered him wine mixed with myrrh. I want you to remember this, okay? We're going to read something in just a moment. He did not take them. When they crucified him, dividing up his clothes, they cast lots to see what each would get. Now, when they crucified people, they crucified them naked. So they would strip them of their clothes and you would hang naked. Someone read for me, please, 25 through 32.
It was 9 in the morning when they crucified him. The written notice of the charges against him read, "The King of the Jews." They crucified 2 rebels with him, one on his right and one on his left. Those who passed by hurled insults at him, shaking their heads and saying, "So, you are going to destroy the temple and build it in 3 days. Come down from the cross and save yourself." In the same way, the chief priests and the teachers of the law mocked him among themselves. "He saved others," they said, "but he can't save himself. Let this Messiah, this King of Israel, come down now from the cross, that we may see and believe." Those crucified with him also heaped insults on him.
Luke goes into further detail. We know this, the two criminals on each side of Jesus. And in Luke's version, of course, we know one of them repents. Jesus says, "Truly I say unto thee, you will be with me in paradise." So there's a variation in Luke that we know about. This does not go into that detail. So now we shift to 9 in the morning. Jesus is up on the cross. 2 people are with him. And basically the crowd is ridiculing him, saying, "If you really are who you say you are, why don't you come off the cross? Why don't you perform a miracle right here? Come on." They do not understand that it's God's will that he is to be crucified. "Come down from the cross and save yourself." He saved others, but cannot save himself. And those also on the cross hurled insults at him. Jesus says, they're telling Jesus, "You said you were going to destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days." Jesus says that, but what is he talking about? I'm sorry? Yeah. Jesus talking about his body, the temple of his body. He was going to die and be raised in 3 days. That was going to be rebuilt. Not the actual temple. They, of course, do not get that. I know I'm going a little too fast, but I want to cover what the cross means. Okay, 33 through 41.
At the 6th hour of darkness came over the whole land until the 9th hour. And at that 9th hour, Jesus cried out in a loud voice. I'm going to mess up.
Which means,
"My God, why have you forsaken me?" When some of those standing near heard this, they said, "Listen, he is calling Elijah." One man ran, fled, filled a sponge with wine vinegar, and put it on a stick, and offered it to Jesus to drink. "Now leave him alone. Let's see if Elijah comes to take him down," he said. How far did you want to go?
41.
With a loud cry, Jesus breathed his last. What happened here? Breathed his last. The curtain of the temple was torn in two from the top to the bottom. And then the centurion who stood there in front of Jesus heard his cry and saw how he died. He said, "Surely this man was the Son of God." Some women were watching from a distance. Among them were Mary Magdalene, Mary, the mother of James, and the younger and the Jose, and Salome. In Galilee, these women had followed him and cared for his needs. Many other women who had come up with him to Jerusalem were also there.
All right. Thank you. Oh, okay, we have another dilemma. Which dilemma did we talk about last week? Anyone remember?
Did he die as man, or did he die as God?
Sort of, kind of. Remember, he's in the garden and he's sweating drops of blood according to Luke. And It's almost like Jesus didn't want to be in the moment. We see this kind of dichotomy between the earthly Jesus and the godly Jesus. Okay, so now he's on the cross, and Jesus says, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? Or why, if you want the New International Version, why have you forsaken me? So, why would the Son of God have a statement like that?
The human side.
Okay, we can go back to the garden argument and say, well, that's just the human side of Jesus. There's nothing wrong with the human side. Doesn't mean he sinned.
But it's also a study in contrast, because this whole business is a study of Barabbas is the worst criminal. Jesus is no criminal. He's the Son of God. It's contrast continually about the best and the worst, the dilemma of truth or the versus, giving into.
Or a lie.
Yeah.
Okay, Peter says that it's the human side of Jesus. Yes.
He became sin, and the Father couldn't look on him.
Okay, he became sin. Now finish the rest.
And the Father could not look on sin, and he felt that.
Okay. This is a good example as well. He took on sin, and of course a holy God cannot look at unholy things, and so Jesus was void of God's love. Another good answer. What else? Okay, this is actually a song. My God, why hast thou forsaken me? Would someone please go to Psalm 22, please? Please go to Psalm 22, please. That's pretty redundant. Go to Psalm 22, please. Verses
1.
Just read 1 through 5. Someone read 1 through 5.
My God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from saving me, so far from the words of my groaning? My God, I cry out by day, but you do not answer. By night, but I find no rest. Some more.
3 through 5.
3 through 5. Yet you are enthroned as a Holy One. You are the praise of Israel. In you, our ancestors put their trust. They trusted and you delivered them. They cried to you and were saved. In you they trusted and were not disappointed.
I'm going to throw this theory out. If you say Jesus was just meant verse 1, and that's what he was saying, do you think that Jesus is seeing a human side? He is void of the love of God because he took on sin. And everyone would say, yeah, sure. Yeah. But what if he quotes Psalm 22, 1 through 5? Does it take on a different meaning? It does take on a different meaning. Because in here, the psalmist, which we believe to be David, says, I am crying out to you. Why are you so far away? You're so far from saving me. I cry out, but you do not answer. And I can't see. I got to back up. By night, but I find no rest. But yet you are enthroned as the Holy One. You are the one that is replaced, and our ancestors put their trust. They trusted, and you delivered them. To you they cried and were saved. So it's a psalm of when we cry out, you are going to save us. Okay? It takes on a whole different meaning then. But I never thought about Jesus took on sin, so God is Lord. That's really good. You were taught that, so you didn't take credit for it.
I was about to say.
I was just hoping you don't take my job. Damn. That's good. So darkness falls over the land. At noon, darkness comes. For 3 hours, we are in darkness. She kind of ruined it, but why are we in darkness?
Some historians want to believe it's an eclipse.
Some believe it was an eclipse, yeah.
Because the God is dead.
Yeah. Yeah, it symbolized that this is what, when you are godless, and you are void of the love of God, and God is dead, like Mark said, then you're in darkness. Remember John, the Gospel of John's a whole concept of dark and light. And that darkness represents evil and being lost, not being born again. And this light concept is being you're children of the light. You know of the love of God. All right? So this whole 3 hours of darkness is to believe that we are without God. This is what it looks like when darkness falls upon the land. God's earthly presence was no longer there.
Neil?
Yes?
Was there any, in your research, was it dark like in Egypt? That terrible darkness
The
where
darkness.
was it, and do you know if it was worldwide? Is there any study?
As Sam said, it could be an eclipse. Some believe it to be an eclipse. Some believe it is a judgment of God. This is what sin is. Sin is very dark. You can make all sorts of symbolisms. Is it a curse? That people go that route too. I'm a philosophy major, so I can ask about 50 different questions. But you can take all those different avenues. The one I wanted to get at, and we'll follow this up after the cross. Here's one. What is death compared to? Darkness. You're dead. God's Son died that day. This was a representation of it. Let me talk about the cross. Two misconceptions that we possibly may have about Roman crosses. Well, one misconception, I'll give you three. One misconception is the cross is not a Roman instrument. The Romans adopted the instrument. It's actually Persian, probably around 400 to 500 BC. So the Romans adopted it, they didn't invent it, but they loved it. All right? The second thing is, if someone draw me, sorry. Would someone like to draw what they view a cross is?
Some say an X.
Okay, some say this. So y'all are so full of spaghetti you won't come up and draw crosses. Okay. Some people, of course, we have the traditional one. Like that. The Greeks, they love their symmetry. We have this one in the back of our sanctuary. We have that because Greeks love symmetry. This is all equidistant. Someone came to our church one time and asked if we were a cultist church because they saw this cross, and that's not a cult symbol. That's a Greek cross. Okay. The Jerusalem cross would have crosses, something like that. What Jesus probably died on was probably something that looked like uppercase T. With possibly, we know there's an inscription and probably was something was made. I think that's Latin for King of the Jews. You see that? I think it's INRI. Yes. That's Latin for King of the Jews. Or the initials. Because I used to go, okay, remember, and I was trying to do it in English. And I was like, no, it's Latin. Okay. Something like that. It probably looks something like that. The third misconception is, although this can be debated because we don't know 100%, when we think of if you can picture the scene where Jesus goes to be crucified, how would you picture it?
3 crosses.
Desolate, 3 crosses. Probably open. Probably a lot of. Oh, sorry.
Way.
Yes. Probably a lot of people would picture it way up, or maybe way at a distance. Okay. There have been drawings that have surfaced probably 100, 200 years after the crucifixion of Jesus, and what they believe is the way up and way out theory is maybe not true. Is that most of the time a person on the cross would be raised about 3 feet up to where their, I'll walk a lot, to where their feet would be at your chest. Now, I hope I don't break the chair. If I got on this chair and I was stretched out, this has a whole different intimate feeling than it does as someone who's 20 feet up in the air and maybe 100 yards away. And you remember what Mark 15 says. Mark 15 says, this crowd that hurled insults at him were passing him by. And if you really adhere to Scripture, you can't really pass by at 100 yards or 12 feet up. I mean, you can imagine that he was hearing everything that was going on. So that's 3 misconceptions you can probably get from the cross. Is that it's not a Roman instrument. It was adopted by the Romans. Probably looked more like a T, and chances are the people who hung from the crosses were 3 feet off the ground. All right. Crosses were, most of the time, approximately 100 pounds. They weigh 100 pounds. So here we go, and I think we talked about this a little while ago. We talked about the flogging and the beating of Jesus, is that he's already bleeding, he's already possibly dehydrated, he needs care. And at the start, until Simon comes and picks up this cross for him, he's carrying a 100-pound piece of wood. Okay? They finally get to his location. Many people have argued 2 different places for a long time. And a lot of people ask, well, how long does it take for a normal person to die on a cross? And that depends. There's 3 ways that most of the time they crucify people. One was that, let's pretend that you are a robber. and they crucified you for stealing, you would be raised up, your hands and feet would not be nailed to the cross, they would probably be tied to the cross. They would be stretched out in a T shape. Tied, remember, not nailed. And because it took you a longer amount of time for you to feel the weight of your body and for your chest to actually bear the brunt of that weight and finally suffocate, would probably take you 2 days, 2 to 3 days. Okay? Chances are, if you're a murderer, you would actually maybe have a cross like this, where your legs would be broken, your knees bent at a 45-degree angle, put together, your ankles that is, with your knees out, one nail in there, your arms would be crossed like this, nailed in position, and because you have absolutely no way to catch yourself and to hold yourself up, it would probably take you about 10 to 15 minutes to expire. Jesus's was probably in the middle. Some scholars believe, anyone ever seen a cross like that? Okay, I can't remember the name. I want to say it's Russian. Some people believe that there's a platform where you could probably put the heels of your feet on. Jesus was probably in between. I guess this is the penalty for heresy, where you were stretched out like the robber or the thief, and except of your hands being tied together, they of course were nailed right around here, somewhere in here. We don't know, from the palm of the bottom all the way to maybe the top of the wrist. We don't know. You were nailed both times here. You were nailed down in the bottom. Most of the times your leg was broken to speed up the process. All right. Now remember, Jesus is beaten. Here we go again. Jesus is beaten. He is flogged. He wears a crown of thorns. Or at some length is forced to carry a cross. They now drive nails into his hands. His legs are probably broken. There is only a little stepped place probably for the palms of his feet. Nails are in his ankles. His knees are bent at 45 degrees. He has a crown of thorns, and there is an inscription that says, King of the Jews. Twice they offer him what they say is rice wine or a vinegar filled with myrrh. Does anyone know what this is?
Speeds the process, doesn't it?
It doesn't speed the process. It's like our version of morphine. To where you need something to numb the pain. And what does Jesus say? No. Why does he refuse it?
He's taking on the sins of the world.
He's taking it on. It's the same concept of people who have natural childbirth, almost. Because natural childbirth, people do not want any drugs in their body. They want to feel that pain, what it takes to create life. As Bill Cosby said, the woman can't have any drugs in her body during natural childbirth. The father can have all he wants. But it's the same with Jesus, is that he wanted to feel the pain of sin. He wanted to make it a pure sacrifice. to take on the sins of the world. He had to bear every brunt of the pain. Now, in this position, if you are stressed out, if you have nails in your wrist, if you have nails in your ankles, if your legs are broken, if your knees are bent, if you have a crown of thorns on your head, if you've been beaten 40 times, less one for heresy, your chances of living are probably 12 to 24 hours. You have, if you are crucified this way, your chances the average time it takes for a person to live this long is 12 to 24 hours. Okay? Jesus dies in 6. What probably happens is that when nails go through your wrist, there's a certain part of the nerve in your wrist that as you hang on the cross, this nerve is severed from the pulling and the tearing and everything else, because you cannot keep yourself up. Remember, you are trying to keep yourself up because when you lean, you cannot catch your breath. All the weight starts to go to your chest. The problem is, as he's trying to catch himself back up on the cross, which many people believe, is that these nerves are starting to wear. He can't feel anything. So now you don't even know if you're trying to catch yourself back up on the cross. But he's trying to keep himself alive. And as these nails are going in, the problem is that every time that he comes back up on the cross, every time that he's trying to catch himself or get a breath, these nails are pulling him in his hands. And so by the time this is over with, we probably see 6 to 7 inches of separation between his arms and his shoulders. Because every time he's pulling his arms out of socket. And probably what happens is, after a while, we all know this, is that the body basically wears out. You can only catch yourself so many times. And not only that, he's probably suffering some internal bleeding at this time. The internal bleeding is probably, maybe there's even blood around his heart. And what's happened with most of these people on the cross die is either one of 3 ways. The first one we know is most of the time is suffocation, to where they cannot, all their weight's on their chest and they cannot get a full gasp of air. They cannot exhale, all they can do is inhale. They can't let it out and they just keep air in and they cannot take any more. And they suffocate, they basically choke on their own air. The second thing is maybe a sudden death, which we all would hope, under the circumstances, is to where, with all the pulling and tearing and all the weight upon your chest, maybe you have a ruptured aorta. And if you rupture your aorta, you're pretty much dead within 30 seconds. The other one is there might be so much pressure and strain on the heart that one could die of a heart attack. The heart just can't take it anymore, and they succumb. Now, when he dies, I can't remember which gospel it is, but he says he pours out his Spirit. When you pour out your Spirit, what happens? Yeah. If I take a cup of, I'll borrow Carol. If I take Carol's water and I pour the water out, what's happened to the water? You've lost it. The water is lost. And I'm not saying Jesus' Spirit is lost, but yet Jesus pours out His Spirit on the cross for us. He loses His Spirit for us. as soon as he says it is finished, he takes the brunt of sin and death and all of humanity. It is the precipice of redemption. The day of redemption has come, because this, in the temple, the curtain, the Holy of Holies, a 4-inch thick curtain has been split. It was the only place in God that they believed that God's earthly dwelling was there. And in fact, it was so holy that there was only one priest that could go in one time a year and be in direct fellowship with God. In fact, some scholars believe that they tied a rope around the leg of the chief priest, just in case he died. In case he dropped dead in the Holy of Holies, they could pull him out. And when Jesus said, it is finished, this day of redemption had come, because this 4-inch thick curtain ripped, this 60-foot high curtain rips. God's dwelling no longer is within this little ark, this little temple. God's dwelling has been poured out for all because of the shed blood of Jesus Christ. Because of His sacrifice, we can know the Father. Everyone. It's over. Jesus says, it is finished. But the story doesn't end there. Think about it. Isn't it so awesome that God pours out His holiness upon all people because Jesus died for us? Because in Paul's messages, if you notice, that Paul doesn't talk a lot about Jesus' life. Like very rarely does he talk about it. What does Paul say is the message of Christianity? What does Paul say?
Death and resurrection.
It's about the cross, right? It's about Christ. Jews look for miracles, Greeks look for wisdom, but Paul says we preach Christ crucified. We preach about a risen Savior. It is all without the cross. Oh, I forgot it. Oh, the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing. It's all about the cross. Paul says this is the monumental point of Christianity. It's where God pours His love and His grace and His forgiveness among everyone because of what He did through His Son, Jesus Christ. And it just doesn't end there. It's not over now. God's going to prove His miraculous love for us by not only ripping the curtain and showing Himself to us, but in what He did in raising His Son, Jesus Christ. And we'll talk about that next week. We're actually going to be into Friday and Saturday. Jesus has died, and now they make preparations. Because this is a wonderful event, but some people are still not believing what's going on. All right? Any questions?
Why do we not say here, He's crucified, dead, and buried? My church would then say He descended.
Send it into hell. Y'all have 2 minutes? Okay. Lutheran?
Presbyterian.
Presbyterian, okay. A lot of people believe that when He died, and we'll get a little bit about this next week, is that when He died, all the prophets of God before Jesus' time, were in hell. Part of Jesus' mission and His prophecy was to descend into hell And that's why he was dead, quote unquote, Friday and Saturday. It's because he had to go to hell and rescue the souls of all who were on the forest. Some people don't have that. Some people do. Sam,
Where were the disciples through this?
where were the disciples? Well, one was denying him, one was doubting him. Let's see.
I think they're all frightened.
We do have Mary. We do have the scene of Mary, and we didn't cover this because I kind of ran over. But we also have this scene of Mary and Mary Magdalene at the cross themselves. Now, even though the Scripture says that watching from a distance, they may not have been up close. They may have kind of sitting back and watching what's going on. I really think all the disciples and even the people associated with Jesus at this time probably don't want to let it known that.
Except John was there.
Except John was there, and
Jesus
if
said,
Mark,
take care of my mother.
right, and so we don't know. We don't know. So, but we know that Peter. I mean, it's chaos is all around. And Jesus is, like I said last week, is pretty much the center of peace because chaos is ensuing all around. Peter is denying him. Judas is betraying him. Thomas is doubting him. They've gone through all his ministry and all his miracles, and yet when the day comes that he is to fulfill this prophecy, they've checked out. They're nowhere to be found.
Well, it comes down to that sentence. You've saved all these people.
Come save yourself. Yeah, save yourself. Okay. I've gone way too long. Next week we're going to talk about the burial. We might talk a little bit about, the people who you thought would be with them weren't, and the people who you thought weren't going to be with them was. He found sympathy in the people that you never thought would find sympathy. Thank you. You can cut that off.